Well, the Lincoln form with Pribble is one of those things that's down the side, on the side of the potato, but I said, I'm not having that potato. I might have Rangers, but then there's the Trenson form with Praffle. But you know what to do with that? That's like chocolate mints, but I prefer scones with the wind. It's what one of my patients might say to me. Now, these words mean something to them, but they're meaningless to us. But it does become a lonely existence, only being able to communicate with yourself. I'm a speech and language therapist, and I work with people who've had severe brain damage after an injury. My job is to help them think aloud, because they can't do it for themselves. I'm like a librarian for the brain. I help people find words that they've lost, and I help them organize them into a verbal filing system so they can make some meaning. But we don't just think words, we feel words. And if you ask somebody what they're thinking as opposed to what they're feeling, you'll get a different response. So think of the name of your school bully. Now think of the name of your first school crush. Do you feel any difference inside? Yeah. Now think of a big pool of vomit. Oh, see the vomit. Smell the vomit. Can you feel that word vomit? Now that word bothers some people, but not others if you've spent years working in a hospital or in a student bar. And this is because words are evocative. They're more than just a recited thought. They create a connection through a shared sensory experience. And this is why I say I'm allergic to electronic communication. I am not a technophile, I am a total Luddite. I do not understand social media at all. I do not understand it when I see people sitting together in restaurants ignoring each other while they use their phone. E-communication to me is sterile. I'm a communication traditionalist. I enjoy the fertile ground of face-to-face interaction because through the spoken word, we get to not only hear someone's thoughts, but also the communication intention. The things like intonation changes and word emphasis, verbal, fillers, and facial expressions and head postures. So even though we have emoticons, we don't really have an effective method to genuinely express how we're feeling through written text. So this is why I say modern technology is making us verbally promiscuous, yet emotionally impotent. People go online and they probably get a bit of pleasure with the multiple forms of electronic communication that they access, but I think they're in danger of catching a new STD, socially transmitted disrepute. Because I hear stories of people going online and they've purged any thought they've had, they've dumped it all over social media, they've spewed it into multiple forms of social communication without any consideration of the consequences. And why is this? Because the spoken word is not inert. Spoken words carry a charge. So people say things online and in text that they would never ever say to somebody's face. Because there's a lot of people in a lot of cultures find it difficult to be really authentic with their emotions. And I would say Scottish people, we are a prime example of this. Now, I had a patient recently, and he was telling me about his dog that he had to have put down. And he was upset, and he was trying so hard not to show any emotion, and he was holding it back because not only was a man, he was a Scottish man. And he might come out in a rash if he showed emotion. So I said to him, sounds like you loved your dog. And he said, well, I know he was old and he was in pain, so I had to have him put down. I said, but you loved your dog then, eh? And he said, we had arthritis, he was in a lot of pain, so I had to have him put down. I said, but you loved your dog, didn't you? And he went, I'm from Glasgow, we don't say things like that. And then in one sentence, he summed up the emotional identity of the Scots. Now, Scots, we talk a lot, but we don't often say how we're feeling. You know, people hold back not to get hurt, and we do this to kind of save our feelings, and we're taught this in our childhood. This is mental protection. And when I was growing up, one of my mother's mantras was, don't show people how you feel, because then no one can get at you. And she's absolutely right. If you don't show people how you feel, no one can get anywhere near you. And your lives become isolated and lonely. And we live life like this. Hiya, could we just have a relationship? But would you mind just staying over there while we have it? Thanks. And this is how I see a lot of people living their lives online. they're saturating themselves with multiple forms of electronic communication. They're gorging on an excess of texting and emailing, but they're starving for genuine human connection. This is because their diet is it's a communication diet of a gluttony of written words, but a rationing of genuine, authentic human emotion because they're devoid of face-to-face contact. So I would say, what is the cost to this, to our own mental health and to our community well-being? Because we don't just think words, we feel words. So, give an example. When I'm working with a patient, and I'm working with somebody that's got dysphasia, which is a type of brain disorder after, say, a stroke or a head injury, what I do is I load words with lots of semantic information to help them recall it a bit easier. So, i.e., a word is more likely to be remembered if it's got an attachment to the sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. That's a descriptor that's associated to that word. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to shout out the first word that comes into your head. Don't censor it, just shout out. Okay. What does a chicken look like? The quiet audience, Edinburgh. What does a chicken look like? Okay. What does a chicken feel like? What does a chicken smell like? Make the sound of a chicken. If I was really bad, I'd get you to do the dance as well. What does a chicken taste like? Chicken. I often wondered, does it taste like chicken or is it frog's legs? Now, think about a stick. Other than looking brown and feeling like wood, there's very little sound or smell reference that you could attach to it. But if you have xylophagia, which is a psychiatric disorder where you eat wood, then you'd know what it tastes like. Think about the word the, T-H-E, the. There's very, very little sensory or semantic information that you could attach to that word. So, the more semantic information you could load to a word, the more likely it's to be remembered. But the thing with speech and language therapy is that I give people my words because they can't access their own. So the words are only cognitively received, they're not emotionally related to, because they're not their word. But I've also studied neuro-linguistic programming, and the difference in NLP practices, we don't give people our words to define their thought. We say back to them the words that they've already used to describe what's going on inside their own mind. But what NLP does is that we load that word with lots of sensory information, not so much semantic, but sensory. So the word becomes more vivid and more physically experienced. The word song, for example, is a noun. It's static, it's externalized. But sing is a verb, and a verb is mobile. So that's imagined, it's internalized, it's felt. Think of a word that's one of the most felt words in the world, love. Love means so much to so many different people in so many different ways. And love is felt in different ways. How does a new mother feel love compared to a Manchester United supporter or compared to a One Direction fan? But we often look up a dictionary for a definition of a word, and we think that word means the same thing to everybody, but it doesn't. Right? Words are consciously and subconsciously chosen to define our own internal thought processes. So our own internal personal narrative is just that, it's personal. Have you ever been to a meeting and something's been agreed, but then your colleague's gone off and done the opposite of what you thought was agreed in that meeting? Yeah. So semantics are not concrete, they're subjective. I'll give you an example of the subjectivity of language. If you look at the use of words across different cultures, you'll find that they use words in different ways. So, in North America, Inuit people, according to folklore, thank you, Mairead, have lots of different words for types of snow. Irish people have got lots of words for different types of rain, and also green, as I've just found out. But Scottish people have got lots of different words for degrees of drunkenness. And I know this to be fact because I've studied in the field extensively on this matter. And global marketing agencies know this, and they brand products using different emotive words that will align with a culture's ethos. There's even gender differences in words. Research on social linguistics has found that men and women choose different words and have different communication styles for describing the same thing. So when a man and a woman watch a movie, the man will describe the action that took place afterwards, whereas the woman's more likely to describe the emotional events that took place, and yes, the woman will use more words to describe it than the man will. But gender selection of words is so specific that there's a new specialist field of speech and language therapy that works with people who have gone through transgender reassignment to help them choose words that will align more effectively with their own new chosen gender identity. So there's such a wide diversity in the words that we use. And the words that we choose covertly betray our inner beliefs. Now, I can have a conversation with somebody for an hour, especially if they've been drinking, and then I get a more distilled and less concentrated conversation. And I could tell them exactly what's going on in their emotional life without them telling me, just by listening to the choice of words that they've got. Now, they're often a wee bit shocked and a wee bit confused that I've seen through their linguistic facade, and they'll ask me if I'm a psychologist or a psychic. And I say, well, I'm Claire, but I'm not voyant. I just listen well. So, I think a lot of people underestimate the gravitas of the words that they choose and the effects that those words will have on their lives. Words have a power to them, and that word comes from evoking emotion, which is visceral. It's a gut response, and that's created far more by communicating face-to-face than text-to-text. And how many times have you sent a text or an email and found afterwards someone's misunderstood your message? Or you've received a message from somebody else and you've misunderstood them? So when we're communicating face-to-face, this is when we get a rapport with somebody. And what I'm finding is that when I'm talking to people through speech therapy, I'm not getting a rapport, but through NLP, I create something else. So feeling and thinking our words is hugely important. So I was a trainer for 5 years, educating healthcare staff on the psychological and physiological effects of traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury. And I started to notice with my patients that had a higher level injury, so their spinal cord was severed from way up here, not down here, but up here. There was a change in their communication. There was a coldness, and there was a distinct lack of empathy. Now, initially I put this down to the fact that they were suffering grief and loss and anger as attached to their injury. But then I met up with an ex-boyfriend of mine, and he'd become paralysed in a motorbike accident. And I noticed that his communication had changed. Now, previously, he'd been a really positive guy, a real go-getter, and he had real great, fantastic social skills. But then there was this coldness, a distance, and a lack of empathy in his communication. So in my fantastic, socially skilled way, I pointed this out to him. And I asked him if his new communication was because he'd been through this really terrible thing, and life as a disabled person was so hard that he had to harden up emotionally. And he said, no, he just no longer felt fear. I said, because, you've been through the most terrible thing in life, you've survived, you're just not confronted by life's challenges anymore. And he said, no, he literally no longer felt fear. Because below the level of the injury, he felt absolutely nothing. So now because of the way he felt, or rather the way he didn't feel, this had changed his communication. And there's been lots of scientific research to validate the importance of feeling what we communicate. And international research has found that people with a higher level spinal cord injury, when they can't feel, it impacts on how they process emotions in the brain. Now, this aligns with the James Lange theory of arousal, which is from the 19th century, that says what is perceived emotionally in the brain has to be felt physically in the body first. So what these researchers have found through brain scans is that when people don't feel anything, the sensory information that goes up to the brain that's linked to emotion starts to die off. And these people start to get a sensory deprivation type of dementia. So this explains why my spinal cord injured patients at a higher level can talk, but they can't feel what they say. Therefore, it's creating their lack of empathy towards other people. But my brain injured patients, they can feel, but they can't talk effectively from here what they're feeling, therefore they don't receive empathy from other people. So I think this is perfect validation of why we should feel when we communicate and why we should communicate what we feel. So I think that the quantity of our electronic communication has gone up, but at the expense of quality face-to-face communication, which has gone down. My personal advice would be, use your phone or your laptop to find a social group in your community that you like and join it. Go outside, meet people face-to-face the old-fashioned way that us Luddites like, and make a real friend, not like an electronic one. My professional advice would be to maintain your brain biology, to maintain your mental well-being, and to secure your social survival. Stop thinking aloud so much, but feel aloud instead. Practice texting chastity, but engage in emotional fornication. Thank you.